koutou katoa, ko Meg Smith tōku ingoa, he uri hau no tētai tokero, ko Ngāpui, rawa ko whainui oku iwi, ko Ngāti Marito o rawa ko Ngai Tawake oku hapu, ko Manaia Te Maunga e runei tōku ngākau, e noho ana hau ki whangarei heads e nai nei. My name's Meg Smith. It is an absolute pleasure to be here speaking with you all today. I was all ready in my planning to say that my session was going to be different. I was going to talk about business and storytelling, but actually, this is what we've heard all day, right? The importance of AI, the skills that it takes to bring the stories about AI and the promise of AI, the hype, if you will, into something practical and real, and also to carry on some of the theme that Mark had around career. How do we think about those skills and that context for our careers today? So I kind of leave you hanging or guessing. It was in the description. These are the 3 skills that I think we need to all be getting obsessed with. So that's conversation, so kōrero, critical thinking about our whakaaro, and storytelling, our pūrākau. Now, I'll break these down and sort of explain each one and give you a few ideas around what you might be able to do in your life to practice those skills and develop them. But it also challenge you as the technologists and the people who are at the coalface in terms of AI to think about the people in your lives, your children, your parents, your brothers and sisters, your cousins, who maybe don't work in tech and aren't as in deep with AI and thinking about it all the time. If there's something in here that I talk about that you might be able to encourage them to start to think about, because this, as Mark said, is not going anywhere. We might come up and down that wave of hype and disillusionment, but it's something that we all need to be thinking about. So in my pepeha, my story, my whakapapa, I sort of explained where I'm from. I'm from the north. This is Mount Manaia. It's near where I live. And we give, in Te Ao Māori, we give our whakapapa, we give our context of who we are and where we come from in order to make connections. And that is a concept that we're seeing become more and more important when we talk about AI, right? The idea of genealogy of data, genealogy of ideas. Where does that idea come from? And can you trace it back to a reputable source? So that's why I open today. I'm the founder and CEO of Cloverbase, which is a business I own with my husband, Mark, who shared a session earlier. And together we've founded the 90-Day Mentoring Challenge, which he talked a little bit about using Nathan's story as a hero, but we also have other people in the room who've done the challenge and people on the call today. So that is a program for people who are working in the Power Platform, Dynamics 365, Copilot space, and thinking about how can they take the next step in their career. We also do work with Microsoft. We're a global supplier to Microsoft. We create training programs for their staff. And one of the things we've been working on is helping the global ATS role. So that's the person who acts as a virtual CTO in a customer, helping them learn and look at the patterns of what's working with the Microsoft AI story, what is landing. And one of the things that we see often, if you haven't seen some of the stories, these are some of the hero case studies with Copilot with Microsoft. We've kind of been drilling into some of the patterns of what is consistent across the organizations who are winning with AI. And one of the main things we see is this ability to look at how are we using it to enable our people. So I'm just going to stand to the side so you can see. How are we using AI to enable people? I'll talk a little bit later about a Lufthansa example and how they're using it with their customer service teams. They built an agent to help resolve claims for compensation for delayed flights in the EU. Which is a good thing to know about if you're ever going to fly to or from an airport in the EU. You can be compensated if your flight is delayed. Lumen is a great example of an organisation that have taken that tops-down approach that Mark looked at here. They really bought in at an executive level. We're going to transform our business with AI. Deutsche Bank is another one. So when we think about skills that are needed in this sort of AI-enabled world, the first thing I think about is something we've heard a lot today, which is this constant change. It's constantly changing. The technology inside of the Microsoft ecosystem, inside of the Copilot story. I heard from one of the GBBs the other day, every 2 weeks, new functionality is being added to the out-of-the-box M365 Copilot. So that says to me as a user is we've got to think for ourselves, how do we avoid the trap of trying something at one point in time and going, oh, it was crap, it didn't work, and then going, I'm not going to touch it, because that's a little bit of human nature, right? We try it, it doesn't get what we want, we go, oh, we'll chuck that out. At this pace of change, we need to build in this, I'm going to try it again, I'll give it another go, I'll have an open mind, I'll learn what more context can I provide to get a better output. And part of like my own journey with this has been from the moment I heard about ChatGPT. I'm not sure if just a quick scan of the room, do you remember where you were and about, we saw on the timeline from Martin this morning, it was 2022. Does anyone remember where they were and what they were doing when they started to see ChatGPT? Yeah, I was sitting at my kitchen table holding my 6-month-old son. I was on maternity leave. I had worked at Google for about 10 years at that point in marketing and sales of Google Analytics Premium. So I'd worked in sort of AI adjacent, right? I'd been talking and selling the benefits of data-driven decision making, the value of machine learning. We'd lived in London for a little while. I tried valiantly to use my pass card to get onto the DeepMind floor. It didn't work ever. But I was AI adjacent. But I was sitting there listening to this, and a lot of you met my husband earlier. He has a lot of energy, a lot of future forward energy. I was terrified. I was sitting there thinking, is my job even going to exist? It will be done in the same way in 6 months when I go back. And I thought, if I'm feeling like this, I didn't have a Gemini logo there, which might not be recognizable on its own without the word. But if I'm feeling like this with the context that I have, what's it like for someone who is not living in the tech world or not so close to it? And also, how can I understand better what I should be doing to work with AI, to understand how it works from I've been a technologist in the sense that I've been a technical salesperson, but I'm not a coder. And so I didn't have that deep understanding of the technology behind it. So I started to learn, and I started to do the trainings, and I started to hear from more than one source. So I'd obviously been in the Google world, and yes, there was some like argy-bargy at some point between Mike and I, because he's been Microsoft for so long. But I took both trainings because I wanted to understand how it was being talked about differently. And I really kind of landed on this challenge, or this place when it comes to our careers of, okay, so what the technology can do changes. If you're using ChatGPT, if you're using Copilot, if you're using Gemini, if you're using Perplexity, many, many others, right? Hundreds and thousands of AI-enabled tools are now available. As technologists, we've been adding value in conversations and projects and in sales meetings and that for so long because we know more about the technology than everybody else. You can learn what it does, you can learn what the features are, you can demonstrate it and bring it to life. We can't do it at that scale anymore in the same way that we used to. We can't be the person that knows everything about the technology, because people who are building the technology only know the part that they're building. It's too much. So the kind of problem I grappled with was, what remains true even as the technology changes? What are the skills that I can focus on and build that will serve me in whatever role it is, and you in your roles, that even as maybe the name of the tool that we're using changes, or the things it can do changes. And that kind of led me to these kind of 3 skills that I think we should all be really doubling down on and trying to do more of, both in terms of how we interact with AI and use it to augment our lives, but also how we connect as people, so that we don't lose that in some of the ways that we can now have technology be helping us. So again, they said it's conversation and critical thinking and storytelling. I think these are the things that, like, I've got a nearly 4-year-old and a nearly 2-year-old, and these are the things I think about when I have no idea what their careers are going to be. All the jobs I've had in my career didn't exist when I was their age, so I can only assume that their jobs don't exist yet. But these are the things that I know to be true as far as they're going to be valuable. So conversation is like, let's start with conversation, because I think it's a bit of a lost art. And if we think about how we are coming to the point of interacting with an AI chatbot, like, fill in the blank, Copilot, ChatGPT, we are the generation that has learnt, varying degrees to interact with digital, first on screens and on our phone. I loved that Martin's point around Elon Musk earlier today, saying this is the year, this is the year, this is the year. It reminded me of when I started working in the online ad space. It was the year of the mobile every year for about 6 years. But it was eventually the year of the mobile, and we went from, oh, don't worry about your mobile site that much, to, oh, yeah, cool, you've got your mobile site, but like people probably aren't going to buy a big purchase like a couple of $1,000 flight on your mobile, right? Now it's just the norm. So when we think about that, though, we come to AI with all of this kind of evolutionary baggage around how we've been interacting with technology. And I don't know about you, but when I first sat down to start talking to ChatGPT, I was treating it like Google. Tell me this. What are the ideas here? I've got a question here. But what I've learned over time through trial and error is that, and also, looking at what people who are out there that are building these things are saying to us, we need to treat it like a conversation. It's not just, here's my question, I'm going to now evaluate the output either as helpful or not helpful, relevant or not relevant. You're going to have to be able to practice this ability to converse, pass back and forth. And I love the idea that really cemented it for me was putting that context into a real life scenario. Say Ben and I are chatting over coffee at the break, and I say to him, oh, tell me about your life in Queenstown. And you start telling me something that I'm like, I don't like, or it wasn't what I meant. I wouldn't just be like, oh, no, see ya, I'm done. Like, I wouldn't just walk away and end the conversation. I would say, oh, Ben, I didn't mean that. I meant, can you tell me about, what you do for fun on the weekends? I would give more context. I would clarify. And so we need to build that into our mindset when we sit down to converse with ChatGPT, Copilot, whatever else it might be. I think that we need to get good at practicing having really good conversations. And in that scenario, I think we should do that with each other, with people in real life, face to face, and then be able to take those insights into the way that we're interacting with and building conversational technology. One of the most memorable ways that I have ever learned about good conversations versus bad conversations was here. This is in Spain. It's outside of Madrid. It's a little village called Belmonte. And Mark and I did a sabbatical year in 2017, and we ended up somehow finding out about, honestly, which I still kind of can't believe this is a real thing. We got put up in a 5-star hotel for a week, all the meals paid for, it was all completely free, and it was, all we had to do was talk to people. It's a program called Vaughantown, and Vaughantown is an English language school for native Spanish speakers. So a lot of people in Spain need to learn English for their work or for different things, but actually have no interest in leaving Spain, or it's actually quite overwhelming to think of going into an English-speaking world, like even London, which is physically very close, but you would feel, maybe not comfortable to do that. So this language school creates these English immersion experiences in Spain, and so they need native English speakers to come and talk to the learners. And what it basically boils down to is you have all your meals together, and you have a real mix of English speakers and Spanish speakers at every meal, and then you spend most of your day in one-to-one conversations. And what we learned really, really quickly in those one-to-one conversations was a boring conversation and small talk will only take about 3 excruciating minutes of your 60-minute session. And then you'll be sitting there with each other going like, oh, here we go. So what the secret was to a great conversation was finding something you had in common. And then the language doesn't actually matter, because you're able to converse and communicate in so much more. You've got a real motivation. You've got a message to say. I had conversations with people about, and a woman told me all about how she adopted her son from Russia. I had a real deep conversation with a fine arts painter who lived in Bolivia. We got to know each other so quickly and form these connections. And I think that's for me, when I think about conversation, it's to get good at it. There's a couple of things we have to give ourselves the opportunity to do. That first one is start noticing what makes a good conversation in your life versus what makes an average one? Or like, what are conversation, what are the things that like buoy it along and give it rhythm versus what are the things that kill the conversation? So the first kind of idea I have is around, in the next week, think about conversations that you're having in real life and notice the things that make it a great conversation. And then sitting down and working with ChatGPT and Copilot, think of it as a conversation that is, you're not expecting a perfect answer from one question. You're ready to have, as a minimum, like a couple of back and forths in order to get where you might get to an output that's actually helpful. And then kind of observe and iterate over time. And then I think the other idea Mark talked about already was this idea of practice. And I was laughing with someone at the back around when he said, like, I used to do 5 prompts a day. That was my goal. I can remember when he set that goal. And I was doing a session for some people up north, and he said that to someone in a session, and they were just like overwhelmed. And I just said to her afterwards, I was like one a day. Like, one a day is actually really helpful. Like, if 5 sounds insane to you, like, one a day is great. But I think it's the regularity, it's the practice, because it's as you practice that you learn more around, okay, what actually is worth doing here. You talked about the value or getting the balance right of what's the minimum effort I can put in to get the maximum output. And that's what you'll learn as you prompt. Sometimes I do a really detailed prompt. Sometimes I've only got a few minutes or seconds, so I do a really quick one. But then, like, I'm constantly learning. The more outputs I get, like, oh yeah, it's worth it when I have the time, when the project, warrants it, to spend a bit more time in my prompts. And then looking at that last one being around building into your mindset and working with AI, this constant iteration, this constant feeding of your curiosity and developing an idea. I think I personally have found anyway that in terms of, if I look back at how I've learned technology or sold technology, it's often been about, okay, I need to understand all the information, and then so using the same example that Hamish used this morning, you kind of diverge when you're getting information, and then you're trying to converge as quickly as possible to throw out the information that is not relevant. But I've found in that kind of is a real handbrake in terms of trying to get value out of an AI tool like Copilot or ChatGPT, because I'm like, cool, I want to learn the UI, I want to know what I'm doing. Now I'll do the same thing every day. But this is a very different way of working because of that constant change that underlies how it's actually going to produce the outputs, is that we have to be able to build in that adaptability into our approach to try a different way. There's from one week to the next, I do some introduction to AI trainings for people, and month to month I would have to go back and look again at the advice on prompt engineering because it keeps changing. You used to have to give a whole bunch of context. Now in ChatGPT, you actually don't have to all the time. And then take agents as an example. You don't actually need to give a whole bunch of context if it's been trained to do the thing that you're giving that specific piece of context for. So the how we interact with it has to keep changing. And that's kind of the last point I wanted to make on conversation as well, is that up until now, when I've been interacting with generative AI, I have been in that chatbot environment. But now it's about, how does conversation impact the AI agents I'm going to build who are going to talk on my behalf? How am I going to teach them about tone and how to evoke a certain reaction or to interpret the emotion in a response? We need to be thinking about that both for how we're interacting ourselves, but also how we're building into agents, the ability to converse in a meaningful way. The second skill that I talk about a lot is critical thinking. Just out of curiosity, how many people in this room have spent time studying critical thinking or being exposed to strategies? Yeah, a few, right? Like, I heard it once in high school. I had my awesome Te Reo Māori teacher. She was really big on critical thinking. Other than that, I'd never heard it again at university. I never heard it in a lot of the work that we've done. That it's this concept that we keep hearing in the context of AI, and I think part of the reason why it's such a an important thing to be intentional about practicing and developing is that as part of that sort of digital heritage we have that I talked about earlier, UI has increasingly got better and meant that, we talk about, in the challenge, we talk about a book, Don't Make Me Think, which is a whole bunch of rules on designing really beautiful user experiences. We have social media that we consume all the time that is constantly trying to interrupt your thought to keep you on the platform, to keep you staying in that. So I love this quote from Brene Brown, who said on a podcast a couple of months ago, that the part of the problem when it comes to the now necessary critical thinking skills we need when we're interacting with AI is we've actively been incentivized not to think. So it's, again, a mindset shift that we have to somehow work into the habits that we're building. It was funny when Mark put his critical thinking stuff up, I was like, I should have compared notes. So not to disagree with what he says at all, but this is how I think about it. And the first thing I think about is this idea of verifying. So when you get an output, building into your habit to cross-reference, to look at the sources, I'll give you an example. We were doing some competitor analysis of the AI ecosystems that, say you've got Microsoft's, you've got Google's, you've got Amazon. We were kind of comparing some of the characteristics of those. And we were using ChatGPT at one point and to understand the sort of Google AI story. And the output that it gave around this particular, it talked about Duet for Google Workspace. And then I was also using Gemini at the same time, and it talked about Gemini for Google Workspace. And we were like, oh, okay. So it basically allowed us, because we were looking at more than one source, to go and find a reputable source, in this case, Google's workplace marketing sales team, sales documentation, to go, okay, they used to be Duet and now it's called Gemini. So to be able to build in this ability to pick not just the sources, but if you could go, either whether it's in the same tool or in a different tool, to understand why you're getting the response you're getting, and is it a verified piece of information. Now, again, the lengths to which you do that depend on whether what you're going to do with the output. Is it is it data that is going to inform your strategy for your entire business? I'd suggest you go and verify your sources and check your numbers on that. If it's to win an argument about a sports team and who's better, I mean, maybe choose your own adventure in terms of what's important to you. But I love this phrase, or kind of the goal of that triangulation of checking your sources, is constructive skepticism. So it's not the sort of just dismissing it as wrong, or when we get a hallucination or something like that, we're going, oh, we'll just chuck the whole concept of AI and ChatGPT out. It's not ready. It allows us to be a really active partner in that sparring, as we're skeptical, but for a really good reason, that we're trying to get to a verified output. I think questioning is something that we also need to be getting better at, those open-ended questions, building in this attitude that we're not just, again, going with one question. We're starting with a question and asking a follow-up question and asking another follow-up question and asking for another example, and then asking sort of a magic question at the end of our prompts. Have I missed anything? What have I missed? Taking, your plan or your output or your project, whatever it might be, and going, what else would you think about? What have I missed here? And I still do this. Again, I think I was saying, like, it's not so important anymore, but I love when I'm doing something with ChatGPT that's a big piece of work or a bigger prompt. What I usually do at the end of it is just tack on, before you answer, ask any clarifying questions and rewrite my prompt to get a better output. And when I started doing that, it went from like averagely helpful outputs to like really, really, really helpful outputs. So that kind of leaving space in your process to have those open-ended questions and not just take your first answer. Because then you're able to do that third step, which is analyze. So looking at how can you filter and interpret information using the output that's given, what you already know, because I think that's what we forget as well when we're talking about AI or using it ourselves, is how you use it and how I use it could be the same LLM, it could be the same chatbot. We're going to get very different value out of those answers. My neighbour, she's a lawyer, and she was telling me about something she had done. She was like, oh, I felt like I was cheating. I used ChatGPT to help me do this thing. And I was like, it's not cheating, because I could have been given the same things, the exact same prompt, the exact same thing. And the outputting document, I have no skill or knowledge to verify whether that is a valid thing you would send off to that particular organization she was dealing with. Whereas she felt like she was cheating because she could read it and go, oh, this is exactly what I would have needed to write. But it's like, it's that combination that allows you to sort of analyze in a meaningful way. Yes.
Have you found that when you do the initial questions, depending on which you use, have you found the historical answers to be different?
I found that, like, I'll give you an example. When I would do those intro to AI sessions, I would do the same prompt, the same words, and that would be a different, and I'd only use ChatGPT because it's like, the most accessible one
versus 4.
Yep, I would look at that, but I would also look at my logged in version where I've set my context, I've set who I am and what I ask about, what my style is. That output, I think of an example I would give is like, you're a small business, you're a marketing expert for small businesses in New Zealand. Help me write a plan for a florist to attract new customers. That would be like my prompt that I was using, and the output that I would get in a incognito browser using ChatGPT, not logged in, versus what I would get from my own account versus switching the models. Yeah, they're all different. And even like I'm finding that with Copilot as well, because I'm using that more and more. That it's almost like you've got to think of it like, I don't know if dialect is the right analogy, but it's certainly when you're interacting, be aware of, thanks for reminding me, because it's a point I was supposed to make in critical thinking. Be aware of the information that LLM is grounded on, or that tool is grounded on, and who made them, and who, I was actually in the Microsoft offices here a couple of months ago. I got an opportunity to have a conversation with one of the AI researchers that came over for the AI forum, just because I was aboard.
Awesome.
She was awesome. Yeah. She was straight up about it. She was like the LLM that she and her research partners were part of creating. She said, you've got to think about, was that LLM created for research? Because she was like, when we're researching, we've got a goal in order to write a paper. That's why we're making that. That's different than a commercial entity, what's a non-profit entity? Like thinking about that kind of greater level stuff. But then also, I guess, whether it's an output or whether it's a marketing message or a social media ad, building into your thinking. Who benefits from me thinking this? Who is the owner of this message? Who is the creator of this message? And what do I want to reinterpret this with in terms of my context? The last kind of skill, I think is if I'm honest, a little bit surprised. I feel like it's already been covered a lot today, both in terms of the value of it. Hamish talked about the importance of stories and showed the tool in Business Value Toolkit around creating a story that tells the value or demonstrates the value of the Power Platform. But also, I feel like Nathan just gave a masterclass on storytelling around making a concept that can be quite, complex and hard to understand, easy to understand through stories. And this is because our brains like stories. In terms of, retaining information. I can remember being taught many years ago in a sales training about how it's so much easier for your brain to anchor on a piece of information or a concept that is attached to a story versus just remembering a list of facts and figures. And I know we're sort of, mid-afternoon, we've had an incredible day of a lot to take in. I wonder if you might be interested in having a little game with me. Just indulge me a little bit. Be a little bit interactive while we just use this as an example. So can anybody take a wild guess? What this image might be about, a particular story? Red Riding Hood. Okay.
Naturally.
What happens first in the story? You remember the first thing that happens, or what happens, like, what's the concept where we start the story?
Walking through the woods.
Little girl's walking through the woods to grandma's house. Exactly. What happens next?
He appears to be around.
What appears to be around? Yep. And then who does she meet?
Bad wolf.
Bad wolf. Then what happens? They have a conversation. Just about. Skip ahead. They have a conversation. The wolf uses the information he finds out in that conversation to outpace her. He eats her grandma. He gets in grandma's bed, dressed in grandma's clothes. Girl walks in. She's, all the big eyes you have, big teeth you have. She gets eaten. And depending on which version you're reading, a huntsman comes along and slices the wolf's belly open, and the grandma comes out, and Little Red Riding Hood comes out. Now, you all in some version of that could remember that story from who knows how long ago. I read it a couple of months ago to my girl. You might have not thought of or seen of or heard of it for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and you can remember the concept of it. And you can probably, without too much effort, think about the so what. The so what from that. But when you're talking to strangers, use some critical thinking. If, the eyes and the ears are looking like a wolf, it's probably a wolf. And so when we think about how we can use stories in the context of AI, for me, I think about I have this great mentor, so if I can recommend someone if you are really interested in getting serious about storytelling and how to convey information that's got great clarity to your executive leaders or to your customers or whoever you might be dealing with. And her name's Kate Mason, and she said this great thing in a session the other week that I just have not stopped thinking about, which is good communicators impart information. Great communicators change the rooms that they're in. And the bit that's really stuck out for me is that whole part about imparting information or giving access to information has become less valuable because now we can access the information we need all the time. When I joined Google in Sydney, the first welcome session on the first day, they asked, does anyone know Google's mission? And I was like, but after that, I ended up being the person that did the welcome on the first day. So now I can rattle off. It's to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. Now we've got so much information. It's too much information. Now I'm like, mate, we've got it both at our fingertips in terms of we can go and find it, but we've also got it being pushed at us. So in order to cut through the noise or to get to a point where your message is memorable, you have to be able to anchor it in stories. And a couple of ways that I think about how we can kind of practice that and get good at that is, as I said before, Nathan gave a masterclass in a session before. So taking a complex concept and being able to simplify it without diluting the message, without diluting what you mean there. I think we'll all be thinking about the producer analogy when it comes to, how we can think about semantic kernel, which I literally only heard about the other week. So thank you for that analogy as well. And it's really thinking about this whole idea of what is the message that you want your audience to take away? And again, thinking about that, how can we adapt to that dialect or that tone or that way of speaking or delivering the message that is going to really land with them? And I to really get simple on it, it's thinking about what is in it for them. Why do they care? And then the purpose. So what's the way in which we can best reveal that information so that it lands in the way that we need it to, the purpose that we want to communicate with. So I love the framework of when you're needing to tell someone something, and this can be scaled up or down, right? This could be a conversation between you and your manager, between a particular client you might be working with, saying, what, so what, and now what? So what is it that you need to tell them? What is the main thing that they need to hear, and why do they care about it? And then what's the ask of them? What's the next action that needs to happen out of that conversation? So looking at using storytelling frameworks to help us in that. And I think just to kind of open up to questions, which I'm very happy to take, and also in the Q&A, very happy for other people to speak up as well if you've got an answer to a question that gets asked. I really love this concept in Te Ao Māori of ako, which means it's one word in Māori that means both to learn and to teach. And when we're learning and we're teaching, it's a collaborative process. And I think that kind of comes down to this whole idea of having a humble and curious mindset, because again, at least in my experience, and how I had learned to use and sell technology, it had always been about like this, know how to click the buttons and show them what it does, know what happens when they know the answer when they ask you a question. And now I've had to go on this journey of understanding that actually I need to be able to demonstrate I don't know the answer, but I know how to find out the answer, or we can find out the answer together. And you're only able to do that if you have a way of going, I've got enough ego. My ego is not so fragile that I'm not prepared to be wrong, and that I'm also able to then unlock from what I think is a really natural defensive place, a curious place, which is, let's find out together. That's, now we're both learning. So I kind of sit down and think about, when I'm doing work, and a chat at the break, and James pointed out something I could do or look to explore in some of the data in one of the pieces of work that we have. I'm like, great, cool. How can AI help me do that? How can AI help me do that rather than me just going and trying to analyze that particular user behavior on my own? So we'll open it up to any questions. We've got a little bit of time. Otherwise, I'm very happy to give people a little bit of a break. I know it's been a big.
Say Kate Mason.
Kate Mason.
Australian.
She's Australian.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah. So I met her through Google. She also spent some time in Silicon Valley doing some executive communications coaching, and she's got a book coming out called Powerfully Likeable, which is this whole idea. It's a good one if you've got any or had any experience with imposter syndrome, which she does a bit of a reframe on. But yeah.
It's slightly off topic. Sorry about that in advance. But with your Google kind of lens, do you think AI, copilots, ChatGPT, and stuff like that is going to shape and change SEO and ad spend?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big one, right? Like we've talked about it. I think you can see it a little bit in where they've done their layoffs, in terms of where the puck is going. The whole Google story is that the ads business funded all of the other stuff, right? The ads business was this machine that has funded Google Cloud, has funded a whole bunch of stuff, right? And now I think, I've been out of it for about 18 months now, so I'm not close enough of it to know if there is a lot of thought going into what's sort of next, but I personally don't see a replacement happening in terms of that. I think when we talk about our own user behavior, right? Like we need to have our own, like if you, in context of what Mark said about having your personal brand, right? Your home. But you think straight away about how is that website findable? How do people find it? And it will be increasingly through, links from social or recommendations. I think is going to become a big one that becomes more and more important as there's just so much information and people aren't just going to one place anymore.
Just to add to that, I think it's because I was talking to a guy in Turkey last week, and he's a marketer for a big company. He's created 1,000 product sites to just drive traffic into the central site, right? All of them are AI generated. So they're all dirty sites. They're just, right? And then because now Google has the first message you get is they're AI generated. Then the next 5 to 10 posts are all sponsored links. Then you're well below the fold now. 20 minutes ago, Sam Altman announced a Chrome extension for search. Right? Go install in your browser, get it in there, and so I think the concept of advertising and stuff in the past is gone, because I reckon in 2 years we'll use audio interface for everything. And so in an audio interface world, speech interface world, where do you display the ad?
Yeah.
Also, like one of the things I think about is even before ChatGPT, we would ask teenager Connor, do you find information? And you probably all know this too. They don't find it. They don't search on Google. They search on TikTok. And again, in terms of teaching those critical thinking muscles, habits for our kids, I still probably will always be a Googler at heart, right? And some of the things they did really right was use the like ads to fund the internet, right? It's to be open and mark quite clearly what an ad is. Now where it's like influencers and showing this product, and yes, like the social media companies have retrofitted to try and say, oh, you have to declare if it's an ad or if you're sponsored or whatever. But if our digital native kids, they don't see that. They just, and so being able to have those like ongoing active skill building around like, okay, well, why do you want that thing? Did you see it? We talked, he's a hip hop dancer and was talking about a friend of his moving to LA. And we're talking about like, cool, like, that a lot of the TikTokers rent houses. These houses, it's a whole business in LA. You can go and rent these luxury mansions by the hour to film your video to make it look like you're really rich. They rent cars, they rent handbags. But the kids watching that, they don't know that. They think that, oh, this is the lifestyle I'm supposed to aspire to. This is the career. I think it's the most aspired to career by teenagers. I think on a survey that I'd seen, they most want to be influencers in a world where we look at it and go, oh, the STEM or STEAM options are endless. We've got all this opportunity with technology, but if we're not taking the kids who use the internet so differently than we do, and the only way we're going to understand how they use it is by talking to them about it or getting them to show us. Because it's just so inbuilt in them differently. Yeah, so I think not going to be ads.
Maybe use AI to sort of say, looking at this video, what's real?
Yeah. And to have those conversations around like, who do you think, who owns this brand? Even some of those things, right? Like, and using AI to go, okay, well, it looks like, what did I see the other day? It's like one of the, what looks like a very eco-friendly, environmentally conscious, very organic skincare brand is owned by like one of the big pharmaceutical companies, and being able to have a process and a route by which to unpick some of those things.
I don't really know how this is a question. It's kind of a statement, but if you look at the history of humanity, what we're kind of describing here is snake oil salesmen. They were saying we're coming and this is medicine and everything like that. And there were definitely people who built the processes we have now that say, no, this is how we define what medicine is. This is the measurements and everything like that, and put rules around it. But also, people still buy. I mean, look, Coca-Cola was one of those things, and it's still a massive brand. It's just always going to be a chunk of humanity that, while we're saying we build these rules, we look at these things and everything like that, we also have to be aware of the environment around us is going to be affected by this.
Yeah, totally. And I think one of what you said made me sort of back to that conversation about the hype cycle, right? And the I think looking for patterns where what we're seeing now, which can invoke a lot of fear, right, and a lot of concern about jobs going and things like that. How can we look at patterns from history that kind of tell us we've been here and done this before in a different version, and what can we learn from that? And one of the things we were talking about was, this kind of prediction around 95% of the content on the internet is going to be AI generated by, was it 2050? 26. Okay, cool. And then you go straight into your brain goes straight into the like defense of those roles and that's a bad thing and oh my gosh. But actually, we've got to have that space too to go, okay, well, the roles that exist now that we all do didn't exist, 20 years ago?
It's the same story as the printing press. You're telling the exact same story.
So it's some go and some change and being able to adapt to that.
But do you think what is actually the point of creating all of this content based on AI, that we're going to use a different AI tool pull that content. Like we're never actually going to see the content that's created by the AI. So what was the point in the first place? It's like I always see these demos where they have two phones that talk to each other. But like that should have just been API integration between the two services. They should never have been converting it to voice, responding from voice, and then converting it back to data again. Like there seems to be all these like useless cases for promoting AI, but I get it for the storytelling.
No, so like kind of the somewhat is like at the end of the day, it's human behavior, right? Like so the AI content generation strategy is because that's how you have the internet in terms of like one, customers from the internet, one, attention from people on the internet. Now, of course, if in that scenario where it's 95% AI generated, we would assume, we hope, you know, human behavior might change and people aren't going to interact, and that won't be a way to win anymore, if that makes sense. And therefore, they will evolve and find another way to your point around